The co-main event, the flyweight champion Pantoja faces the debuting Kai Asakura. Pantoja has the second most wins in flyweight history, second most finishes, and third most significant strikes landed. He's got wins over guys like Brandon Moreno, Steve Ercik, and Brandon Royval. Pantoja is dangerous everywhere with 8 knockouts, 10 submissions, and he has never been finished. Kai Asakura makes his UFC debut and steps right into a 5-round title fight. Listen to me, everybody. Nobody wanted to fight him, but Pantoja is an absolute badass and agreed to the fight. Asakura has 13 of his 21 wins by knockout and 12 wins in the very first round. He is a vicious striker. His last 2 wins were by knees to the body. Asakura is part of a surging Japanese MMA scene and looking to make a statement in his very first UFC fight.
Alright, so Kai Asakura has finally had his UFC debut announced, where he'll be fighting against Alejandro Pantoja for the UFC Flyweight Championship at UFC 310. Now, everybody who's watching this video is probably thinking, why the hell is a guy making his UFC debut getting a title shot? That's a level of Dana White privilege which is completely unheard of, even for the biggest stars outside of the UFC like Michael Chandler and Kayla Harrison. However, there's a number of very important reasons behind why Kai Asakura is getting this opportunity, and I'll try to explain them all in this video because it's probably pretty difficult for someone outside of Japan to understand them. I'm half Japanese and can speak and read and write the language, so there's a few cultural insights into the regional MMA scene over here that I have that others might not. Anyways, this video is going to cover 3 major topics. The first is going to be the post-Pride Japanese MMA scene. Second is going to be the impact of the Asakura Brothers and their promotion breaking down. And finally, I'm going to cover some of the key reasons why the Japanese MMA market is so lucrative for the UFC, which will help to explain why Kai Asakura is getting as much Dana White privilege as he is. Part 1. The post-Pride Japanese MMA scene. So starting off, I'm assuming that everybody who has been fed this video by the MMA algorithm on YouTube is a hardcore MMA fan, so I know that you guys know what Pride is and what happened to it. Pride was the biggest and most prestigious MMA org in the world, even more than the UFC at one time. But then, after the ties to the Yakuza were uncovered in 2006, Pride and the company behind the org, Dream Stage Entertainment, lost their TV contract. What remained of the organization was then sold off to the UFC in 2007. However, this left a big hole in the Japanese MMA scene, since all the Japanese fighters who were fighting in regional level promotions like Shuto, Deep, and Pancrase were left with no big Japanese organization to go to. This especially sucked for them because the UFC didn't have the lighter weight classes like flyweight, bantamweight, and featherweight back then, which are the optimal weight classes for most Japanese male fighters. So the only choice they had was to fight in the WEC. What ended up happening was the company behind K1, the kickboxing promotion, right? And what was left of the business team that had organized Pride created this promotion called Dream. Now, the problem with Dream was that it just didn't draw as many eyeballs as Pride did. Now, I can't say for certain what the causal factor was, but I think one major contributing factor was that Dream didn't have the massive heavyweight stars that Pride did. When Pride was dissolved, the contracts for their top-tier heavyweight and light heavyweight talent were scattered across the world like the 7 Dragon Balls after making a wish. Rampage Jackson went to the UFC, where he KO'd Chuck Liddell again. Fedor Emelianenko went to Affliction. And sure, Dream still had Alistair Overeem and Mark Hunt because those two were contracted under K1's parent company, but it just wasn't the same. As a result, Dream's cards were filled with a lot of very good talent, examples being Prime Mick Diaz and Gegard Mousasi, but eventually the parent company ran out of money in 2012, followed by the whole thing being pawned off to the guys who run Glory Kickboxing. The 8-year period following the dissolution of Pride in 2007 was considered by many to be the ice age of Japanese MMA. There were no new big stars in this era, and the stars they did have, like Kazushi Sakuraba and Minoru Man, weren't really like a big enough draw by themselves. However, this all changed in 2015 with the founding of Rizin by President Nobuyuki Sakakibara, the same guy who was the president of Pride. This founding of Rizin was a big deal, since Rizin basically promised a return to the good old days of Pride. The first event they ever put on was 3 straight nights of fights at New Year's, featuring big names like Kazushi Sakuraba, Fedor, Yuri Prohaska, King Mo, and Vadim Nemkov. For 2.5 more years, they kept on signing big names like Kyoji Horiguchi and Mirko Krokop. However, the problem of no new big stars remained, since Kazushi Sakuraba and Fyodor, those were both from the Pride era, and Yuri Prohaska, he would go on to become a draw in the UFC, but most people really didn't know or care about him back then. However, that would all change in 2018 with the rise of the Asakura Brothers. So, this brings me to part 2, the Asakura Brothers. So, I'm finally at the point where I can actually talk about these two. And first off, one thing I've got to explain is that Kai Asakura, the brother making his UFC debut, right, is the less famous brother. Mikuru Asakura, the older of the two, is much more well known in Japan, with larger followings on both YouTube and Instagram. Kai is basically the Luigi to Mikuru's Mario, although most would also say that Kai is a better and more accomplished MMA fighter. So, just to start explaining who Mikuru Asakura is, well, Mikuru Asakura, when he started out, was a delinquent when he was a kid, getting expelled from high school for getting into a fight with another student and being sent off to juvie for driving without a license. However, as we know from numerous examples such as John Jones, Conor McGregor, and Jorge Masvidal, being a criminal is one of the best bases for becoming a star in MMA. So Mikuru was primed to get started on his path to superstardom. However, spoiler alert, unlike the pound-for-pound GOAT and the cocaine leprechaun, Mikuru Asakura actually completes his redemption arc. Mikuru and Kai, the latter of whom was much better behaved and actually managed to graduate high school, started training seriously in their teens. Mikuru Asakura made his pro MMA debut in 2012, then went on to amass a record of 6-1 before getting the call to fight the former UFC fighter Hatsuhioki in Rizin, where he brutally KO'd the veteran with a left high kick. This highlight KO over a veteran, along with his down-to-earth personality and redemption story as a troubled youth finding his way in the world through mixed martial arts, was the perfect combination to birth a new star. Mikuru Asakura was to Rizin and Japanese MMA what Conor McGregor was to the UFC. Mikuru Asakura, just like Conor McGregor, was a flashy southpaw featherweight striker with a personality the audience couldn't get enough of. Both of them even boxed and lost by KO to Floyd Mayweather, so that's another commonality right there. Eventually, Mikuru built up a 7-fight win streak in Rizin and gained the moniker Dojo no Densetsu, or Legend of the Streets. However, when he actually challenged for the Rizin featherweight title, he lost to Saito Yutaka in an absolute war of a fight. It's definitely worth watching, and currently has around 4.5 million views on YouTube, on the Rizin Fighting Federation YouTube channel. But losing this title fight wasn't as big of a deal for Mikuru as it seemed, because Mikuru had amassed a whopping 1.5 million subscribers on his main YouTube channel by 2020. As of the making of this video in October of 2024, he has 3.5 million subscribers on YouTube, and Kai Asakura, the Luigi to Mikuru's Mario, has 1.36 million. Now, to put that all in perspective, Chael Sonnen has 1.29 million subs on YouTube. Israel Adesanya has 1.14 million. The current biggest star in the UFC, Alex Pereira, has 477,000. Sean O'Malley, who is supposed to be this young superstar that appeals to a young audience, has like 925,000. Okay? And if you look at the view to subscriber ratio, Mikuru and Kai both have the UFC's top stars beat. Anyways, getting back to Mikuru's story, in 2021, he helped establish an MMA/kickboxing promotion called Breaking Down, which consists of 1-round, 1-minute bouts between random misfits from all parts of Japanese society, ranging from former Yakuza, to rappers, to random Polish guys. It's basically street beefs, but a little bit more stylized and much more Japanese, and with even more memeable characters. The fact that anybody could get onto Breaking Down if they could scrap for a minute and say something unhinged or funny during their audition was a major selling point. and further contributed to the Asakura Brothers' reputations as the biggest names in Japanese MMA. In fact, by 2024, when Mikuro Asakura retired from MMA at age 31 after a KO loss to a guy named Ren Hiromoto, it could easily be said that the Asakura brothers had outgrown Rizin, like how Conor McGregor transcended the UFC after his fight with Floyd Mayweather. Even when retired, a vlog of Mikuro doing construction work gets 1.5 million views. That's after Mikuro is retired. This isn't even the prime, right? Anyways, what is undeniable in Japanese MMA today is that anything the Asakura brothers touch turns to gold. And in the case of Kai Asakura, who most would consider to be a better martial artist than his older brother Mikuro, he was able to get gold too by winning the Rizin bantamweight belt by KOing Juan Archuleta, who is a former Bellator champion and also was the first guy to beat Patchy Mix. Asakura's resume included Kyoji Horiguchi, who he's 1-1 with, and Manel Cape, who he's also 1-1 with, and Hiromasa Ogikubo, who Kai is also 1-1 with. Now, you might not know who Ogikubo is, but he's legit, although he's a bit of a smudge grappler like Bilal or Marab. And just for the record, Ogikubo has a win over Alejandro Pantoja on season 24 of TUF, although Ogikubo then went on to lose TUF to Tim Elliott in the finals. So what is readily apparent from this is that Kai Asakura has been fighting top-tier talent outside of the UFC. Now, does this mean that Kai Asakura deserves a title shot? Hell no. But does he have a really good shot at winning? Hell yes. Plus, you're probably going to love watching Kai Asakura fight, since Kai Asakura is all about standing and banging. His knees in particular are absolutely fantastic, and Kai Asakura also has legit KO power at flyweight, with 62% of his 21 wins coming by KO. And now finally, here's part 3, which is why the Japanese MMA market is so lucrative and why the UFC is salivating over trying to get Kai Asakura to fight for the title. And they are as follows. First, develop the UFC brand in a region that the UFC has historically struggled to find a foothold in. The second is that Japanese fighters like Kai Asakura will finally bring excitement to a stagnant and perennially starless flyweight division. And then the third reason is taking advantage of the current state of the Japanese economy, and specifically the weak yen, by investing now and then reaping benefits later. Starting with 1, the UFC has always struggled with establishing itself as the premier MMA organization in Japan. Dana couldn't do this during the Pride era, when he went and got Chuck Liddell KO'd by Rampage and Pride, and they couldn't get this done during the MMA Dark Age era either, even though they went there a couple of times. The UFC has so far failed with cracking into the Japanese market, which is dominated by Rizin and to a lesser extent Breaking Down. You can see this for yourself by looking at the YouTube following for Rizin versus the UFC Japan channel. So UFC Japan has 153,000 subscribers and is getting anywhere from around a few hundred to a couple thousand views per promotional video, and a couple 100,000 views for free fights like Taira Tetsuro's fight against Alex Perez. The highest view video on the entire channel is Francis Ngannou's highlight reel from 5 years ago, which has 890,000 views. Now that pales in comparison to Mikuro Asakura getting 1.5 million views in a week doing construction work after he's retired, and over 20 million views on his most popular content from 4 years ago. Kai Asakura's daily sparring videos and vlogs get anywhere from 500,000 to 2.5 million views normally, and the free fights for Rizin get tens of millions of views. So, what's undoubtable is that these are the top 3 big dogs in Japanese MMA. Now, you might be wondering, does everybody in Japan actually know that the UFC has the best fighters in the world? Well, they do. And everybody in Japan knows that the UFC is the best organization with the best fighters in the world. However, nobody cares because all of Japan's big stars like Horiguchi, the Asakura brothers, and others have been fighting in Rizin. Furthermore, the UFC's heavyweight division is pure trash, so there really isn't an incentive for Japanese people to watch that either. By signing Kai Asakura, the UFC will finally be able to get Japanese MMA fans to genuinely care about the UFC. Now you might be wondering, what about Tetsuro Taira? What about the other Japanese prospects who are signed to the UFC right now? Aren't they a big enough of a draw? Well, right now they aren't, at least not for casual fans of MMA over here. Sure, everybody knows about Tatsuro Taira and Rinya Nakamura and Ray Tsuruya, but will casual MMA fans watch a UFC pay-per-view just for them? Probably not. But the Japanese audience will do that for Kai Asakura. Now, on to my second point about the flyweight division. I'll try to be brief, but the UFC flyweight division is the second most boring male division in the promotion. Pantoja is a great champion, but he just really isn't that much of a draw. He's kind of hit or miss with fights, going through wars with Moreno and Urseg while half-guard camping Royval. But he also doesn't do all that much to promote himself, with the most memorable memes about him being how he was an Uber driver while being a ranked fighter, and how his dad left him when he was young, and he cried over it when he became champion. Now, I totally empathize with the guy. His life sucked, and he was born poor. And MMA helped him find a way out of poverty. But there's also a dozen other Brazilian fighters who fit that description, who are way more of a draw than him, like Alex Pereira, Jose Aldo, Charles Oliveira, etc. If Kai Asakura were to become champion now, I kid you not, the UFC might willingly and voluntarily do flyweight main events for their pay-per-view cards in Japan. Either that or headline a fight night card with the flyweight belt and have him sell out an arena in Japan like the Saitama Super Arena or the Tokyo Dome, right? Like, imagine Asakura versus Moreno or Asakura versus Taira in a Japanese versus Japanese main event, or even a trilogy bout with Manel Kape. And plus, as I said earlier, Asakura's style is plain fun to watch, right? Since he's a striker with KO power at flyweight. And finally, that brings me to why the UFC is doing this right now, like at the moment. I'll be brief because this is also a boring economic stuff. But right now, the Japanese yen is very weak, with one US dollar equaling about like 150 yen, give or take. So basically, the Japanese yen is like the it's like the Tony Ferguson of currency right now. Used to be great, and then it took a nice nosedive. Since I assume that the UFC, since it is an American company, right, it makes most of its revenue in US dollars, and so this is the time when the UFC can get the most bang for their buck, literally and figuratively, in Japan. By investing into the Japanese market now, the UFC could make back a ton of that money later in ticket sales, and in subscriptions to Unext, which is where everybody watches the UFC in Japan. And I didn't know where I could add this final bonus point anywhere in the rest of this script, but I also have to mention that pirating anything Japan is heavily looked down upon, right? If you say something like, I pirated that manga, or I torrented this movie, people condemn you like you just killed their father and pissed on his grave. There's an immense amount of respect for authors and artists and martial artists. So, yeah, Dana can rest assured that he'll be getting every single cent from the Japanese audience. Anyways, just to wrap things up, the Dana White privilege that Kai Asakura is getting is because he's a huge star, and his brother is an even bigger star. And together, they'll help the UFC crack into a market that has remained outside of the UFC's grasp for forever, while also fixing one of the least exciting men's divisions in all of MMA. And just to give my predictions for how this fight I think is actually going to turn out. Now, I'm super biased because I'm Japanese. I'm a big fan of Kai Asakura, not so much of Pantoja. But I think that Kai Asakura is going to win by KO. And specifically, he's going to KO Alejandro Pantoja with a knee to the body. Now, the reason why I can say this is because Kai Asakura's best weapons are knees. And one thing that we know about Pantoja is that he has an iron chin. Now, how do you KO a guy with an iron chin? You hit him to the body. And in fact, if I recall correctly, there's a video of Sean O'Malley kicking Alejandro Pantoja in the liver. And Alejandro Pantoja quits after being kicked in the liver. I can't be bothered to go dig up the clip right now, but I'm sure that if you search it up, it's probably on Sean O'Malley's YouTube channel at some point. So yeah, I legitimately think that Kai Asakura can KO Pantoja. Now, of course, Pantoja might grapple grape him, and, marob him, but I really don't see that happening. Pantoja's quite old, while Kai Asakura is 30 and in the prime of his MMA career. So yeah, I'm super biased, and I'm a big fan of Kai, but yes, I actually genuinely do think that he has a shot at winning the title. Like, share, and subscribe if you want to. I know this is the first video on this YouTube channel, but I plan to update it from time to time. Thanks, and goodbye.